A man refused to let an African American soldier sit in first class until she handed him a surprising note. Lieutenant Sarah Thompson had just wrapped up an intense, demanding deployment overseas. After countless long months away, she was finally on her way home. The exhausting nature of military life had worn her down, and as she moved through the airport, her shoulders were weighed down not only by her heavy gear, but also by the emotional toll. All she could think about was getting some well-deserved rest. Sarah's uniform, a familiar deep green, had become worn and faded after enduring many harsh environments. The lines on her face reflected the hardships she had faced, the nights of worry, the bonds she formed, and the friends she lost. Despite it all, she held her head high with a quiet pride and resilience that spoke to her inner strength. When she boarded the plane, Sarah was taken aback to discover that she had been upgraded to first class. It seemed like a small gesture of gratitude from the airline for her service. Grateful, yet somewhat uncomfortable, she settled into the luxurious seat, feeling somewhat out of place among the first-class passengers around her. Surrounded by passengers in business suits and designer attire, Sarah finally began to relax when a man approached her, his expression a blend of irritation and disbelief. He was sharply dressed, with an air of entitlement that Sarah had encountered many times before. "Excuse me," he said, his voice edged with annoyance. "I think you're in the wrong seat. This is my seat." Sarah looked at him, momentarily confused. "I believe this is my seat," she replied, holding up her ticket. "I'm in seat 3A. The man glanced down at her ticket, then back at her with a sneer. "There must be some mistake," he scoffed. "You're a soldier. Shouldn't you be seated in coach, not in first class?" A wave of embarrassment and anger washed over Sarah. She had experienced prejudice before, but it was never easy to face. Taking a deep breath, she tried to keep her composure. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is the seat that was assigned to me." The man shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "Unbelievable," as he looked around as if expecting someone to agree with him. "You don't belong here," he sneered. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond as she felt the eyes of other passengers on her, some curious, others uncomfortable. Feeling the judgmental stares around her, Sarah was just about to offer to switch seats, hoping to avoid further confrontation, when a flight attendant appeared. "Is there an issue here?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. The man quickly explained his version of the situation, but the flight attendant simply smiled at Sarah. "Lieutenant Thompson, your seat is indeed in first class. Thank you for your service," she said, then turned to the man. "Sir, your seat is in 5A, just a couple of rows back." The man's face flushed with embarrassment, but rather than apologize, he huffed and walked to his seat, clearly irritated. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration as she sank back into her chair, trying to dismiss the encounter, though the moment lingered in her mind. As the plane began its ascent, Sarah reflected on her years of service. She thought of the sacrifices made by her and her fellow soldiers, the bonds they'd built, and the struggles they'd shared. Sarah thought of the sacrifices she and her fellow soldiers had made, the lives lost and the deep bonds they had formed. She also reflected on the prejudice she had faced, both in and out of uniform, and how it continued to affect her. It wasn't just the man's words that had hurt. It was the reminder that, despite all she had done for her country, there were still people who saw her as somehow less than. It was a pain she had carried for years, one that never fully disappeared. As the flight continued, Sarah couldn't shake the discomfort. She noticed the man occasionally glancing at her from his seat, his expression filled with disdain. It was clear he was still stewing over their earlier exchange, which unsettled her. But Sarah decided she wouldn't let things end on this note. She had faced far greater challenges in her life and wasn't about to let a stranger's prejudice mar her journey home. Resolving to take control of the situation, she took out a small notepad from her bag and began to write a note. It was a simple message, but she hoped it would convey her feelings. "Dear Sir," she began, "I understand that there was a misunderstanding earlier, and I wanted to take a moment to address it. I am proud to serve my country and to have had the opportunity to protect the freedoms we all share. I have seen the cost of these freedoms up close, and I carry with me the memories of those who never made it home. I hope that one day we can look past our differences and recognize our shared humanity. We're far more alike than we are different, and kindness is something we can all afford to extend to each other. Sincerely, Lieutenant Sarah Thompson." Sarah carefully folded the note and signaled to the flight attendant, asking her to deliver it to the man in seat 5A. The flight attendant, who had observed the earlier exchange, nodded and took the note with a supportive smile. Sarah watched as the flight attendant walked over and handed the note to the man. He looked surprised as he unfolded it, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper and more contemplative. Sarah couldn't quite read his emotions, but she hoped her words had reached him. For the rest of the flight, the man did not look in Sarah's direction, a silence that left her with a sense of quiet resolve. The man appeared deep in thought, his eyes scanning the note over and over. Sarah hadn't expected a response, but she felt a sense of peace, knowing she had chosen to rise above the conflict. As the plane began its descent, Sarah prepared to disembark, eager to leave the incident behind and focus on the joy of reuniting with her family. But just as she stood to retrieve her bag, the man approached her. His demeanor had shifted. He looked humbled, almost remorseful, holding the note tightly in his hand. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to say. "Lieutenant Thompson," he began, his voice softer than before, "I wanted to thank you for your note. It really made me think." Sarah nodded, waiting as he gathered his thoughts. "I realize now that I was out of line earlier," he continued, his gaze dropping. "I made assumptions about you that were unfair and based on my own biases. I'm truly sorry." Seeing the sincerity in his eyes, Sarah felt her heart soften. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "It takes courage to acknowledge that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." The man hesitated before extending his hand. "My name is Tom," he said, "and I want you to know that I'm grateful for your service. I lost my brother in Afghanistan a few years ago. He was a soldier too. Seeing you brought up a lot of emotions I wasn't expecting." Sarah felt a pang of empathy as she shook his hand. "I'm truly sorry for your loss," she replied with heartfelt compassion. "Losing someone you care about, especially in the line of duty, is never easy." Tom nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, "and thank you for reminding me that we're all in this together." As they exited the plane, Sarah and Tom walked side by side, two strangers who had found a moment of connection in the most unexpected of places. The note Sarah had written had helped bridge the gap between them, allowing them to see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow human beings. When they reached the gate, Tom turned to Sarah one last time. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out," he said, offering her his business card. "And please take care of yourself, Sarah." Tom smiled as he handed her the card. Sarah returned the smile, tucking the card into her pocket. "I will. You take care too, Tom." Watching him walk away, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. What had started with tension had transformed into mutual understanding and respect. This experience reminded her that even in moments of conflict, there's always the potential for growth and connection. Sarah left the airport with a renewed sense of hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she also knew that there were people, like Tom, willing to learn, change, and connect in the spirit of kindness and compassion. And that, she realized, was something worth fighting for. What moments of connection have you experienced that helped bridge a gap between you and someone else? Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.